Hello, everyone, and welcome to V.A.C. Roundtable number 78. Yep, we have gone that far. And this one is going to be kind of ourselves. We do have a guest with us tonight, Mr. David Borden. But that's because he's also, part of the discussion as well as highly educated, as he has been um, part of the, drug control strategy, at least on this side of the fence, educating through Stop the Drug War, etc. So I want to thank, of course, David for joining us tonight. And yeah, we're actually just going to kind of get right into it. This is kind of our own discussion. So we're going to be ping-ponging around specifically as we have points and ideas around this. I just ask, please just keep your mic off, that way, any coughs, hits, etc., don't necessarily cause the camera to shift otherwise.
Sorry about that.
With that, um, hi, I'm your guest tonight. At least I'm your spokesperson's moderating the discussion. My name is Etienne Fontaine. And Veterans Action Council has put together and is submitting our talking points as anybody has the opportunity currently up until Monday at midnight. Basically, the Drug Enforcement Agency is rescheduling cannabis. And because it's rescheduling cannabis, it has opened up a time period where you are allowed to anybody, the public at large, can submit any comments on what is transpiring, good, the bad, the ugly, etc. Last I had read, there was over 30,000 comments input, at least this week. And of course, I expect more people, including the Veterans Action Council, will be submitting ours. So, with that in mind, our discussion basically kicks off with, and I'm going to start this one kind of directly to David, who actually directly benefits from the change in Schedule 3. We know that, there has been, concerns about pharmaceutical companies, because they there were or have been a concern because Schedule 3 allows them access as well as it follows the FDA protocol, which most professional pharmacies, pharmaceutical manufacturers follow. However, people seem to forget that to bring a new drug to market takes approximately a few $1 billion and approximately 10 years. So it is also just outright has been available to pharmaceutical companies, and they created Marinol, they created which is Dronabinol. We saw Epidiolex, when we have seen various other cannabis drugs that have been necessarily derived. So a lot of the fear is that the pharmaceutical companies would have outright control from the get-go. And I think we can, make people aware that it is not going to change the current system that is in place with the 10th Amendment realities. However, it is going to open up quite a few access and access points. So, with that in mind, David, thank you for joining us tonight. Who do you see is going to directly benefit potentially from Schedule 3?
There are at least two clear benefits. One of them is eliminating the 280E tax on cannabis businesses, and the other making it easier to secure permission to do research with cannabis. Uh, the 280E, well, you're directly affected by this, but as someone who has talked to people in the space, including you, um, it seems to me that a 280E is an industry killer, and it can't go on forever that much of the sector, especially in the west of the country, is operating uh, unprofitably, um, and that not change. Um, Businesses are going to close. I'm sure we've already seen that. It's the smaller businesses who are the most vulnerable to that, or whose principals have the most uh, to lose, or most proportionately to their means. Um, uh, we see there are all kinds of downstream effects from situations like that. One of them, I believe, is particularly in the West, again, that businesses are unable to consistently provide the level of security, or do the take the large steps, design steps to improve their security and keep their employees safe. And that's something I started thinking about while doing my report on cannabis store robberies, which analyzed what the big surge that happened in Washington State. But I realized by doing that, you just don't see nearly so many reports um, in the East, and there have to be reasons for that. And the financial condition of the businesses is probably one of them. We'd also, looking at it from the equity standpoint, and maybe we have some members of that community listening here today. If or when a small business owner uh, decides to sell or is forced to sell, the equity questions are how much, the equity question is how much will that person take home for their long labors uh, to use toward their lives, or to invest again in their communities. That's a fundamental part of equity. Um, uh, Read about the economics of long-term structural unprofitability. You see issues like um, businesses cutting back on the opportunities they provide to their staffs to do things that will improve their skills and make them advance their careers. We're seeing layoffs, so that's a really big one. As far as the research side, um, I would like to learn more about how it affects things, but certainly lots of people talk about it easing the way to research. To do research, I've also heard people say the law that did ease the way to research on cannabis uh, will paradoxically have a an effect of making things more difficult after Schedule 3 happens. But still, um, um, you know, and the research, with the research angle, it's probably less about FDA qualification, because if it's in the interests of a large enough entity to qualify cannabis through the FDA, which it might not be, they have the resources to do it, regardless of the schedule. So it's probably more the smaller studies. And, with more people, more adults anyway, using cannabis, more varieties of cannabis, there's a need to improve our understanding of the health impacts, the good ones, the negative ones, what are groups of people who might want to be wary of something, watch out for something, who are the groups who might benefit the most. So patients and um, regular users uh, via the research that ought to be facilitated are also a group benefiting directly or indirectly. Sorry if that was a long answer, given our
No,
long list
no,
of.
no. I mean, it's there's a lot of potential benefits that we see, from healthcare providers having access, research institutions having, potentially easier pathways to, doing, research, which, as we know, is what has been lacking. But as we know, it hasn't been lacking internationally, but we know that domestically they want to see more of that, which is why, one of our members, Brian Buckley, is, doing his own and has his own IRB because he can't wait anymore for studies on veterans and PTS. He has access to do it now once we get that funded. So, and of course, legal and regulatory bodies moving this out of, Schedule 1 will, and 2 will also allow that patients with specific medical conditions, and of course, advocacy organizations. It seems Shane has been able to join us. We're on our first question. We're going to go to Michael Crowitz, which is our first question, which is who actually directly benefits from the change in Schedule 3? And then I'm going to go to Shane. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, well, thanks for joining us, Shane. I really appreciate it. Shane Pennington is one of our sort of go-to experts, legal representative who seems to be in the middle of a lot of the more in intense conversations around federal cannabis issues, and it's just amazing all the legal issues that have come up, so much more complicated than we thought it would be when we thought, oh, well, we would legalize cannabis, and when we legalize cannabis, we all get to sit on the porch on a rocking chair. We legalize cannabis, and now we're trying to even, wrangle what our definition of legalization is. It isn't even really as settled as I thought it was. But I just wanted to say a couple of things to that question about who directly benefits from this. The first thing is that I think we have to, this thing I'm about to say would fit in a lot of places here today, certainly in the history section. But I think it's very important to mention this is something we asked for. The cannabis movement asked for this. We didn't just ask for it, we demanded it. We went in court in 1971 and demanded rescheduling and fought for many years with some of our frontline cannabis activist resources, Normal and other entities, fighting for almost a decade before finally this sort of took a back seat to other efforts like state level reforms, state initiatives, other legal avenues, even international work. So I just think it's worth mentioning and reiterating that this is something we asked for. We demanded it. We wanted at the time, and this is in the history section, but our go-to leader, Bob Randall, was actually willing to accept Schedule 2, which our movement is most certainly not willing to accept today. Schedule 3 is far better than Schedule 2, for several reasons. So that this is even more than what we thought we were going to get back in the day, and it's something that we've asked for. And then the other thing I want to just sort of touch on, because I've worked with so many people out in the field and have talked with so many people out in our cannabis movement, I'm very, cognizant of the fact that we have a very, very large percentage, even a majority of our cannabis, sort of movement or culture that is very, very suspicious of big corporate entities, big corporate powers, especially big pharma. And anything that we see that changes, I think we almost immediately jump to the conclusion that big pharma must be manipulating this, big pharma must be behind this, big pharma must be benefiting from this. First, let me say, big pharma has a good way of benefiting from a lot of things and manipulating a lot of things. So those can both be true at the same time. But having said that, there's nothing really in Schedule 3 that gives an edge to big pharma that they didn't already have a better edge before. Big pharma was able to handle cannabis, just not able to grow it inside the United States so easily. But like GW Pharma and Bayer and all these guys that set up the grow rooms in the UK and got the United Kingdom government to say yes, and they just did all their research from there. And then once the research is done, they bring it in a package form, and on paper, and our FDA is very happy to accept it. So there really has never been a stumbling block to big pharma researching cannabis. That's not to say that they might, not benefit from, some of the changes that we make. But I think any of the changes that we're making right now are going to benefit small pharma as much as big pharma, and level the playing field, at least for a moment. Um, that's my take on it, for what it's worth.
Council Member Crosby, welcome.
Hello, happy to be here. Hope everybody's doing well. So the benefits of Schedule 3, I don't know if anybody touched on it, but it's going to be able to be insured. People are going to be able to go purchase it, or get a doctor's prescription, and it eventually be at a pharmacy. And from what I understand about Schedule 3, I mean, it's a lot of the meds that are prescribed very frequently are like the Schedule 3, and a lot of times they'll hand that out like candy. Hopefully they are that liberal with cannabis. Um, Eventually, hopefully we'll get there. And another thing, I think the patients would, again, the patients would benefit because of the standardization of what big pharma will be bringing into this wider scope of consumers. And I think you know the research and the heavily funded research, when it's allowed to be NIH funded. We're going to learn a lot about cannabis, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, David pointed out in our chat there that of course Schedule 3 will also cause some criminal penalties to be reduced or eliminated. So Shane, you're a lawyer. What are your thoughts on this reality of who benefits?
I mean, I think Michael really nailed most of it. So let's just walk through. I don't know how much time we have. I could talk about this for quite a while. But I
We have
guess
our own
like
time frame. Just to know, there is no time frame. Take as much
it's
as
an
you want.
important question, and I've gotten it so many times, and I've seen so many online debates about this issue. So let's talk about who benefits. First of all of the companies, right, that are currently selling cannabis under state law automatically benefit. Another, because 280E, the tax penalty that applies to those businesses, just automatically disappears overnight, reducing their effective tax burden by, for many of them, 80%. It's literally going to save the industry from going straight down the drain. The second group that I think benefits are the medical professionals and doctors who are already recommending cannabis and treatment to patients, and the patients and the regulators who regulate those professions. Because in recognizing that cannabis has a currently accepted medical use based on interstate use at the state level, that's a historic thing. It's the first time the executive branch has done that. And it didn't just do it through, a little memo. It did it through a massive analysis backed by the highest legal authority in the executive branch and the most expert scientific agency in the world in HHS. And so that benefits everybody involved in the medical supply chain automatically, because it gives them the respect that they've been denied for decades and decades. Whereas before, under federal law, these folks were drug dealers, and the people that they were serving and the patients who they were helping were considered drug addicts and abusers. Now the federal government has recognized that had it all completely backwards. And in fact, this is accepted and legitimate medical use at the state level. It's also a victory just for states' rights in general. It recalibrates the federal government's approach to drug policy at a time when that's a very hot button issue. So if you think about the abortion issue and mifepristone and all of that, this is a big war that's being waged, and it goes much broader than cannabis. In fact, it goes straight back to our founding and the Federalists and Anti-Federalists. I won't get into a big schoolhouse rock about it, but suffice to say that part of the genius of the American regime is its division of power, not just among three branches of governments, but also between the federal government and the state government. And that's premised on the idea that the states are better situated and better equipped and just better at governing things that affect directly public health and safety, like the practice of medicine. And so recognizing state authority over that benefits all of us by because federalism protects our basic freedoms. In fact, it's a foundational thing I think that a lot of us forget about, because it's been protecting us since, old James Madison and all, put it in there, but it nonetheless is extremely important. I'd like to, I could keep going and going, but all the folks that were pardoned, the folks who under state law who are the states who have already followed suit, including Maryland and others, who are being let out of prison because of this. There are also all the folks we're already working with the Sentencing Commission to get sentences reduced as soon as Schedule 3 becomes a reality. That will benefit untold numbers of folks under federal and state law because of the way that sentencing works. Then there's just the general removal of stigma that's associated with Schedule 1. This could keep the scientists and researchers who've been locked out of the lab for decades for no reason. The list goes on. It's monumental. It's absolutely historic. And so before I stop, I'd just like to just quickly address those myths. So first of all, Michael covered it very well. I just want to make a point. If you're the pharmaceutical industry and you want to come take over the cannabis industry right now, basically any of the major pharma companies could just buy them with the pocket change in their couch cushions and just flush them down the toilet and seriously not think about it ever again. Like, you really should just do yourself a favor, go look at the market and budget of these companies, look at the power they have over lobbying, and then look at the size of the cannabis industry, which, it's important. It creates, thousands and thousands of American jobs. But to the pharmaceutical industry, it's less than a gnat on the back of a hippo, right? It's nothing. And that's important for folks to understand because the pharmaceutical industry has been in this game forever already. They have Marinol, Dronabinol, Sativex, Syndros, Epidiolex recently. They've been making cannabis-based and cannabis-derived medicines since the 80s, and they've had no problem doing that. So if you think that they're just arriving, you're late to the party. This has been going on. So that's really not the question. The question is the status quo going to change? And you bet it will if the cannabis industry is no longer circling the drain because 280E is no longer dragging them down like some kind of perverse Kafkaesque anchor, right? Once that if you say that you're the pharma industry and you want to take over cannabis and just run it over and steamroll it, put aside the fact that you already could do that anytime you want, right? But if you wanted to, would it be easier or harder with that industry circling the drain because of 280E? Obviously, it would be easier because they're weaker and they're more vulnerable, right? Once they have this influx of cash from the removal of 280E, the industry becomes stronger. There are even more jobs. It becomes more stable. It becomes more legitimate in the eyes of the federal government. That makes it harder, not easier to take it over. Okay. And I want to be clear that I'm not some rose-colored glasses, naive person who doesn't understand the power, the awesome kind of terrifying power of some of these interest groups like pharma. I do get it. We all should be concerned in many ways about that. If you need proof of that, I'm sure all of us are affected by the opioid abuse problem, the overdose epidemic that's going on. Pharma is killing us, right? And in many ways, it's a very big problem, and we should all be afraid. But Schedule 3 is helping, not hurting. So I'll just stop there. I could keep going. If there are any other myths that you'd like to have addressed, this is a good thing. And the fact that we have to prove it is kind of astonishing, but happy to do so.
We'll go there. As you saw from our list of questions, we're trying to break it down so we don't overwhelm the viewer because there's a lot of layers to this onion on top
Totally.
of. I'm going to just do a slight correction here because as the oldest dispensary in the United States, I have been fighting 280E for 7 years. And unfortunately, for those who have been caught up in 280E, it's not going to stop the cases that are in offer and compromise, etc. Unfortunately, although the National Cannabis Industry Association will be circulating legislation for people who have been hit by 280 to get that back, that's still a long way over the horizon. However, those of us that are in those 280E fights, unfortunately, they don't just magically disappear. Lord knows we wish they did, but still for the other 10,000 and other ancillary businesses, this is a huge weight collectively off of our backs. Council
Yeah,
member,
if I could clarify, it doesn't retroactively.
Correct.
So going forward, so those taxes no longer, or the penalties no longer accrue, right? From the moment that rule becomes effective 30 days after publication in the Federal Register. So yes, you're correct. I wish that it would retroactively fix things, but
Oh, brother, trust me. Leslie, you have a follow up, and then Pearson also has a follow up.
Yeah, something Shane said about the pharmaceutical companies just having the ability to come in and just squash the little guys. I mean, we saw that in the hemp industry. As soon as we had federal legalization, they were able to use their funds across state lines. They were able to use their infrastructure from big ag and the sorts. And I see Schedule 3 helping the pharmaceutical companies because they're going to be able to set up that infrastructure. They're going to have less restrictions about going interstate and importing and exporting. And they're going to be the only ones that are going to be able to start testing those waters because of it being research. So that's where I see it really helping the pharmaceutical companies.
So I wonder what this will do to interstate commerce.
If I could address that, it actually doesn't change a thing about interstate commerce. It doesn't legalize any interstate commerce whatsoever. All of the possession, distribution, manufacturing, you name it.
I would have to disagree with you that for research purposes, they can get special allowances through the government to do it for medical research and for it to stay within those lines.
They can already do that with Schedule 1. In fact, I've represented many of those entities, including Dr. Sue Sisley, Scottsdale Research Institute.
But Schedule 3 will have less restrictions. It will be easier. Same with the import and export.
This is a myth. This is a myth. In 2022, President Biden signed into law the Cannabidiol and Medical Marijuana Research Expansion Act. It changed the restrictions, tightened them up, actually. A lot of people thought that it was going to relax them. It actually tightened the restrictions on cannabis research, and it made those restrictions applicable to marijuana as marijuana, not based on schedule. So with all other drugs, looks like if you look at the Controlled Substances Act, normally its schedules 1 and 2 are treated a certain way, then 3 through 5 are treated another way for purposes of DEA registration for research. But with cannabis, now that there's this law that's cannabis specific, it no longer matters what schedule cannabis is in for research. Now we hope that after this is done, that Congress will loosen the restrictions on cannabis research. I guess my first point is like, it actually doesn't loosen the restrictions on research, but like, if it did, that would be a great thing. I would welcome that. And I don't think that we should, look, my opinion is, and I'll shut up after this so that you can rebut, but I think that when the federal government is blocking science, we are in an effective imposed dark age. That is something that we should all be terrified about. And I'm not sure exactly what your concern is based on the hemp industry. I'm eager to hear, but I just can't imagine how anyone could argue that we're better off with the federal government making research of anything harder.
Well, I absolutely agree with you there. What I did see in the hemp industry is about 95% of the businesses going out of business. So I hope you were correct that, this isn't going to give any sort of leverage to the situation.
Pearson,
I'm going to post in the chat something that I wrote about this. That way people can read it and decide for themselves.
Pearson, your follow-up?
Along the same, not along the same lines, actually. So I'm up here in Alaska, legal THC, decriminalized since 1972. I was one of the first transportation company owners for cannabis distribution in the state of Alaska for agriculture, for growers to shops. I traveled the state, so I got really involved with all the owners and my question is, you sound pretty certain on it not having interstate commerce, but with Schedule 3, like, so they're turning it into Schedule 3 with restrictions, and so if we're Schedule 3 and it's federally legalized, I can't get cannabis from Kansas flown up to Alaska under the metric system, the seed to sale, and okay, so it won't be federally legalized, then it'll just be Schedule 3 state by state.
Not only will it not be, you're correct, not only will it not be federally legalized, it'll still be, unfortunately, categorically federally criminalized. The federal government is no, I think less likely to enforce any of those criminal
Yeah,
provisions.
so the insurance companies won't, big pharma won't touch that then.
So so insurance works hand in hand, as your question implies, with big pharma. There's no law that makes them do that. It just is
No, no, no.
how it
I'm sorry. Not with big pharma, but the legal recreational industry now, legal or medical, depending on which state you're in. I'm sorry I cut you off, but what I'm questioning is I'm trying to figure out what the best play is for the one of my buddies up here that are in the cannabis
sure.
industry on the like nose to the grindstone that don't have conversations like this. So that's my biggest worry for them. Those companies getting pushed out because they can because they'll be able to buy from Thailand. Storefronts will be able to buy from Thailand, and that doesn't include the $800 in retail cannabis tax per pound up here.
Sure, yeah, you're out
So
there in Alaska. I can imagine the interstate
yeah,
issues pretty important. And unfortunately, it won't change the restrictions on interstate commerce from at all for Schedule
okay.
1 to Schedule 3. It won't
Well,
change import export.
that's a good thing. That's a good thing for Alaska grows. Like when we first started, we had like 700. I think we're down to like under 200 now, and we're expected to lose another 20%. It's renewal season for licenses, and there's a couple great companies that are set up, and but there's so many that are just dropping like flies because of the total burden of it. But cool. All right, that's reassuring for them, and but I am looking forward to like $3 grams from Thailand, Thailand eventually.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Okay, I
maybe
got to
one
keep
day.
things.
And I mean, this is different than hemp. I just want to say one thing about what the 2018 Farm Bill did, and I realize it might be changing, but it said that states can't interfere with interstate commerce in hemp. There is no
Yeah, it's
such
THC
provision.
different. Yeah.
Yeah, totally different. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
David.
Just a thought looking back on the pharma questions. Hopefully, this will be a case of a rising tide lifting all boats, and if it lifts up the sailboats, then maybe it's okay if it also lifts up the super tankers, or since you guys are veterans, let's say aircraft carriers.
Yeah, nor here nor there. But it brings up. We had a second question that we kind of pulled back, but it is still applicable to discussion. And we touched greatly on big pharmaceutical, but does the move from Schedule 3 give big pharmaceutical an edge on the dispensary system as a whole?
I mean,
Outright, there's
what's
no
the
competition.
rationale
Go ahead.
for that? What's the rationale for that? I've never understood. I hear this question, but I never understand where it's coming from exactly.
I think it's because people think that all of a sudden it's Schedule 3, that all of a sudden cannabis is now going to be available at their local pharmacy, which of course is not a reality, right? And we
No.
have created these we are the lead of the second generation of dispensaries in the country, the first one being Dennis Perone, Jeff Jones, etc. And we have established ourselves locally, regionally, etc. But don't get me wrong, the pharmaceuticals have a distribution system that we can't handle nor touch, but they're not in medical cannabis at the rate that I think consumers think that this would happen. So that's where that question comes from, because as a dispensary owner, that's what I get asked. That people are like, oh, so you guys are out of business, you guys gonna have to shut down now since it's now going to be federally regulated. And I have to remind them, we did this all under Schedule 1. Okay, we're not changing under Schedule 3. You know what I'm saying? We have set these realities for what they are, and we created. We took the objective reality that was happening. We didn't like it. We inserted it our own, and we have been successful in that as it's been replicated state by state. But I still hear from my patients that fear that now they're going to have to go overpay at the pharmacy for their cannabis, which of course we know isn't the case. So that's kind of
if
where that came from. Michael?
if I could explain,
Oh, go ahead.
just real briefly. Oh, go
Shane,
ahead,
then
Michael.
Michael.
I don't want to cut you. Okay. So I think people are confusing two different concepts in federal law, neither of which is well understood. The first is FDA approval of a drug for interstate marketing under the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Okay. The second is rescheduling. Normally, there's a reason why people kind of blur these things. Normally, I'm talking about almost always, in the decades since the Controlled Substances Act has existed since 1970, they have gone together. In other words, a Schedule 1 substance couldn't get out of Schedule 1 unless and until it was FDA approved as a drug for interstate marketing under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Cannabis has broken the mold. It is not FDA approved for interstate marketing. It has never, it is, unless they change the standard, it's not ever going to be approved by FDA for interstate marketing. Yet, unlike any drug in the CSA's history, it is being rescheduled and moved out of Schedule 1, right? That is what is causing all of this confounding and confusion, because people think, oh my God, now it's an FDA approved medicine like Epidiolex, right? That means this pharma companies will be able to get a monopoly on it. There will be interstate commerce. It'll be a prescription drug, which means that we're going to have to deal with all the GMP and all those FDA requirements that are so terrible. None of that is true. It is still FDA, it is still subject to the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, just like every other substance in the world, right? But it is not coming into the pharma pipeline through the FDCA. Of course, just as the pharma companies got Syndros and Epidiolex approved, put them through that, cost them billions of dollars, but they did it, right? They could do that with another cannabis-related compound in the future. Nothing's stopping them. But even that wouldn't change the status of bud, right? It wouldn't change the status of weed under state law, because that is not changing because of rescheduling. The only thing that is changing is that the federal government has recognized it has a currently accepted medical use based on state level medical use. That's going to reduce the tax burdens. It's going to reduce the stigma. And it's going to therefore sort of open up commerce intrastate and sort of reduce the barriers and penalties through, indirect means, through prosecutors are going to be less likely to prosecute, charges are less likely to be filed, and that sort of thing. None of this has anything to do with shoving cannabis into the pharma pipeline.
Michael.
Yeah, so we've been getting a lot of feedback and working a little bit with Adam and those guys with the I forget what they even call it now. It's the Craft Cannabis Association working on interstate commerce pacts. And they've got a few governors that now have been looking at, and at least one or two governors that have actually signed laws that would create a pact, an interstate pact between two friendly, let's call them friendly medical marijuana states. So I guess my question as I wrote it was, is there any state level fix to this interstate stuff, or is it just federal law that will open up the possibility for medical marijuana interstate stuff?
The things that you just said are, I think, the most creative attempts. One other idea that I came up with and that I've written about that I won't take too much time on, but you're welcome to look it up if you want. Because cannabis is going to be Schedule 3, the CSA contemplates direct dispensing of cannabis as a drug. That's not really opening up interstate commerce, but it is a legitimate path to sort of even more, sort of federally blessed medical use. But really, to fix this problem, you're going to have to do some surgery on federal law, either through a constitutional amendment or legislation. I mean, look, I think that I'm always looking for creative ideas, right? Maybe some genius out there will find a way. I haven't seen it yet.
Someone will pierce that veil eventually. All right,
Hopefully.
let's move on to that next question there. Peggy, council member.
Why is Schedule 3 the minimum legitimate schedule the DEA could have chosen? And I ask this specifically because we know that all animals, including vertebrates and invertebrates, have been found to have endocannabinoid systems.
The answer to that is very frustrating, but actually fairly straightforward. So the reason that DEA can't go, well, I guess it could go further than Schedule 3. It could go to 4 or 5. In order to do that, it would have to make all the findings that have already been made. Plus, it would have to say that cannabis has an abuse potential less than substances in Schedules 4 and 5. And that relative abuse potential finding could justify a less restrictive schedule. It can't deschedule, however, for a very frustrating reason, which has to do with international treaties and a provision of the law that I think is unconstitutional that requires DEA to criminalize certain substances when the UN and the WHO criminalize them under a treaty that we're a signatory to. And so that's very frustrating. I think it's unconstitutional. If it ends up, if I ever get a chance, I'll challenge it in court, and Michael will be one of the expert witnesses. But until then, that's why we're stuck in at least Schedule 1 through 5. But you're correct. Your question is right on that DEA could conceivably move it to 4 or 5. Now, why they didn't, I think that's because the federal government is a slow moving ship, is the short answer.
And many of us, we've all been part of the government, so we're well aware of that slow reality. Michael, and then on to the next question.
Yeah, so I just wanted to chime in there. That question was one that I thought would be a good opportunity to just make this case that, the arguments that they make, why Marinol, the legal FDA approved THC drug, it's a synthetic THC. They call it dronabinol. They call it THC dronabinol. So it's just THC. Essentially, as far as I understand, the drug company could use sourced plant material from other countries, put it into the sesame seed oil capsule in another country and bring it here as a finished product. And I don't think the DEA would care if it's plant-based or synthetic THC. The rub being that to grow the cannabis inside the United States was hard. But there's other places around the world where they're still growing and have always grown cannabis rather liberally. But anyway, I digress. The problem for me has always been that Marinol was and is Schedule 3 for quite a while now. And it was down scheduled from Schedule 2 for its safety and low abuse potential and stuff like that. And this is essentially just THC in a sesame seed oil capsule. So you're basically, from an FDA perspective, saying that either it is the same and cannabis should be treated the same, or they're saying that somehow putting it in a sesame seed oil capsule is somehow a delivery device that lowers abuse potential, or somehow the size of the dose lowers abuse potential, which I've always found to be very specious arguments, at least certainly debatable. And the bottom line being that whole cannabis and the cannabis extracts that the government was studying at the time were Schedule 1. They handed that off to industry, who then made a product and put it out on the market, and the DEA awarded them Schedule 2 on something that was just previously Schedule 1 and hadn't changed a bit. It was just now made by a drug company. And then after that, which I thought was fascinating, the drug companies went around and rescheduled dronabinol, Marinol, after the FDA and the DEA were convinced to go to Schedule 3. They had to, because the states have their own scheduling, many of them, they had to go around all these states and have a lobbying effort to change the schedule of Marinol at the state level. And two things: one, that was successful. Here's this marijuana essentially reform right under our noses that the cannabis movement didn't even know happened for the most part. And two, that it was such a wide scale thing, it was almost taken as no movement on the field for cannabis reform. In fact, I'd say it was, no movement on the field for cannabis reform, even though that was a huge thing, rescheduling cannabis extract, THC, in a sesame seed oil pill to Schedule 3. So to me, as far as fairness, And I think well, let me say one more thing. I know this is taking a lot of time, but I think this is really cool, and I just thought of it. But our buddy Carl Olson years ago got in an in-depth conversation with the FDA, and he was asking him like, why, why is this, like this, about the THC and the sesame seed oil and everything, and they, basically gave the answer that I'm giving you. That's where I got these answers from, is from the FDA themselves about the delivery device and about all that, and it was just the funniest back and forth between him and the FDA. And at the end of the day, there was no difference. There is no difference. The FDA admits that there is no difference of the product essentially. And this was the one takeaway, was that they said, as a matter of policy, is an unwritten policy, but a norm, is that no extract drug, no derivative drug would be more, excuse me, no plant material would be more restrictively scheduled than the derivative drug. In other words, if you get some, drug like THC from plant material, the plant material will be less restrictively scheduled, not more restrictively scheduled than the more dangerous, ostensibly boiled down derivative drug. So they broke the mold on that and went the wrong way. And I think to this day, and I'll finish with that, to this day, I think it's the only drug that you'll find in the entire pharmacopoeia where the cannabis whole plant material is more restrictively scheduled than the active ingredient, so to speak, or a derivative drug.
Well stated, Michael. Thank you for that. Our next question, this one is specifically, we crafted this one for you, Shane. So we're glad you showed up. Leslie, you've got the next question.
Oh, and this is something I'm so curious about because I'm not a fan of the synthetic cannabinoids. The question is, what would the rescheduling to Schedule 3 have? How would it impact on the novel cannabinoids?
Well, so I guess there are two answers. There's a direct effect and then an indirect effect answer. So the direct effect is not at all. DOJ went out of its way, so did HHS, to say, like, look, we're talking about marijuana as defined in the Controlled Substances Act, which excludes hemp. Most of the cannabinoids that you're talking about fall into one of two camps. They either, well, I guess you could divide them up a couple ways. One way to divide them up is if they have the Delta 9 level, right, to qualify as marijuana. If they do, then they're going to move to Schedule 3, right? If they don't, then they're hemp. And so those are not being affected by this at all. Those have already been descheduled unless they qualify separately as tetrahydrocannabinols under the Controlled Substances Act, which is a separately listed Schedule 1 reservation or designation that's reserved for synthetic THCs, which DEA, rightly or wrongly, has defined very broadly to include basically everything that you synthesize from hemp or marijuana, right? So if you think about Delta 8 synthesized from CBD, in DEA's mind, that isn't marijuana, but it might be hemp, but it's also synthetic tetrahydrocannabinols and therefore a Schedule 1 substance. Same thing with THCA, and presumably, I'm speculating here to some extent, but because DEA has already said that about all of these different cannabinoids, I assume it would say the same about many others. Now, of course, this is all debatable. It's all subject to challenge, and the 2024 Farm Bill is coming down the pipe. So this is an area that is changing and shifting. But for right now, scheduling is not what you have to worry about. What you have to worry about is DEA, first of all, and second of all, Congress. And I guess the states that are kind of going after those.
Well,
Leslie?
first we have to be clear that none of these novel cannabinoids are going to contain Delta 9 because these are isolated compounds. What we do need to look at is the definition of marijuana, and it does state analogs and derivatives and whatnot. And so some of these novel cannabinoids are keys that are very similar to Delta 9 that open the same lock and sometimes more aggressively. I think there needs to be something in place, especially when we talk about abuse potential and manufacturing practices or whatnot. So I'm really curious what is going to come down the pipeline because I've been appalled at what's happened in the hemp industry.
Right. So the thing I don't disagree with your textual reading of the definition of marijuana, right? I agree with you. Of course, to be marijuana, it has to have the Delta 9 level anyway. So it's not,
No,
we're not even talking.
an analog in chemistry is something that's very similar in structure that has the same effect or a similar effect.
But because of the hemp definition, which is
No. This is it says analogs and derivatives. So I have a chemistry background, and so these things they're similar. They would, in my mind, fall in line as analog. So I don't think, and others are arguing currently right now that these things don't even supposed to be considered hemp. So I'm just wondering how this Schedule 3 is going to affect that conversation that's already in place.
I want to try one more time to answer this, and it could be that I just don't understand and that I just don't get it. Right? That's possible. But I do think I do, and it's important enough that I want to try to break it down. So we have like the cannabis plant, right? Marijuana includes a whole bunch of stuff in it, and it includes all parts, whether growing or not, seeds thereof, resin extracted from any such part, every compound, manufacture, salt, derivative, mixture, or preparation of such plants, its seeds, or resin, but it does not include hemp, as defined in 1639 of Title VII,
I think
right?
where you're misunderstanding is the chemical definitions of what an analog is and what a derivative is, or a stereoisomer, or any of those things. Because if it's similar, then it's an analog. So it would fall in more of the definition of marijuana and not in the definition of hemp.
Yeah, I think I'm just not you're right. I'm not a scientist, so it's entirely possible that I don't understand. What I will say is that I've worked with DEA on many of these sort of novel cannabinoids that have come out, and sort of brought these issues to them. And every single time, DEA is like, "All right, is it synthesized?" Which is another scientific term, right? Which I don't know exactly what that means, but they always think it's synthesized. Let's put it that way. And so the way that they do the analysis is, does it have the Delta 9 concentration? If yes, marijuana, right? If no, is it synthesized? And almost always the answer is yes to them. And then they say, okay, so that means Delta 8, Delta 10, THCA, THCO, on and on. They've said all qualify not as marijuana or hemp. They actually acknowledge that they might qualify as hemp under certain constructions. But the point is that they find them to be synthetic THC and therefore Schedule 1 on that basis. I think that is a challengeable, or like, that's something I think reasonable people can disagree with. But I
It's a
don't
leap of
claim to
faith
know.
of sorts. Yeah.
Well, it's already in place with other things. I mean, like ecstasy, MDMA, and then it went to MDA and then sassafras. But let me read you the definition of a chemical analog. It is a compound that is structurally similar to another chemical compound, but differs slightly in composition, often by the substitution of one or more atoms or functional groups with different atoms or groups. These structural modifications can result in compounds with similar chemical properties and biological activities, though the degree of similarity can vary. So the definition states that. So these chemical analogs should fall under the line of marijuana, not hemp.
So the definition of marijuana in the CSA doesn't use the word analog. There is an analog act, but it has a different definition of analog, which I'm happy to read if you want. But the bottom line is the federal government doesn't enforce the Analog Act anymore. So I hope some of that helps, but I don't want to hijack the whole thing here, going round and round about CSA definitions and science questions I don't understand anyway.
Yeah, we need to move on. This is just becoming circular. Next up would be Council Member Landry.
Hello, good to see all the council members, and nice meeting you, Shane. And my question is, we covered a lot of different things from, Peggy's mentioned the animals, and how we're still arresting people for this plant, and how violent that sounds when there's companies making millions and millions of dollars, so I'm glad to be here and working to stop all that. So you may have mentioned some of this, Shane, some of this question, what would we like to see happen as a result of Schedule 3 legal dispensing authority versus prescribing authority, VA test cases, pilot access program, CMEs. That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, good to meet you too. And I mean, I think that depends on where you're sitting, right? I guess personally, what I want is business to be opened. I want criminal restrictions to be reduced. I want barriers to entry at the state and federal level to be ameliorated. And I want research more than anything to be opened up. To get there, and I guess to get to what we might call the promised land, which again, we all, I think, might define it a little differently depending on our background and what we are after in life and with cannabis, right? But however you define it, for the vast majority of people, it's going to take a lot more than Schedule 3. Schedule 3 is a step toward that promised land, but we have a lot of work left to do once we take that first step.
Michael, you got to follow up.
Yeah, I just wanted to really talk a little bit about Veterans Action Council's wish list. I think it's really great, actually, that we've put a lot of time in our working group meetings into, sort of mind engineering the future, not just being reactionary to things happening today or some of our historical work, which is really important, remembering and understanding the past. But the challenge that we've had to try to change the narrative at the federal level within the legislature has been greater than we anticipated. The relatively simple task. Here we are working in Vienna. We're sort of interacting at an international level. We just thought, hey, let's get the United States leadership together with Canadian leadership on this cannabis stuff, because the cannabis program in Canada works so much better from our perspective. It would be a great, sort of aspirational goal to be able to have a veteran choose their cannabis at home and have it mailed to them at home through a veterans program. And utilize the state level dispensary system to do it. That's basically the corollary of the Canadian system. It's been a lot more difficult than we anticipated to do that. But having said that, that's our dream. And I guess, for you being here, it's really great because we've had sort of this, down to earth, sort of idea sessions where we're trying to figure out how we could really do this in a real sense. And we come up with some great ideas for the future, like cannabis cultivation for developing programs for occupational therapy and stuff like that. Some great ideas, but really down to earth within medical cannabis. We think we could do a couple of pilot programs within certain very small regions that would tie the Veterans Affairs Hospital to a certain state program and have access to cannabis and use the dispensing authority instead of the prescribing authority for them to be able to handle it and do the whole thing wrapped up as a research project that they could then apply, in a larger scale throughout the VA system. So I guess, logistically, is that a crazy idea of ours? Is that something that under Schedule 3 seems possible?
So I've been having conversations with the State Department, as I know you have. And I should say, Michael, like you asking me that, I mean, I think it should be the other way around, right? I think you maybe know as much or more about this than anybody outside of Vienna or outside of the State Department. In case everybody on the call doesn't know that, like Michael really does know a ton about this particular question. My own view, for what it's worth, based on my own personal conversations with the Department of State, is that they are both ready to expand from here and to sort of work on some of the problems that you're talking about, but they are also worried. So, for example, the proposed rule on rescheduling talks about the Psychotropic Convention of 71, right? And, when I broached that subject with them, they were, oh my God, not that they don't understand it, they do. It's just a complicated area that's going to create a lot of work for them. And so I think that it's going to take the hard work and continued aggressive posture of people like you. I know you've been doing it a long time and you're probably tired of it, and it's a thankless job, but it will probably require you continuing to bang down the door to push changes further. Both, I think the key is changing the U.S.'s executive branch stance on this, and then moving out from there, which is what you've been doing, but also working it from the other side in Vienna.
Well, and we will continue to, as we have had, discussions with the ONDCP, the State Department, and in Vienna, etc. We see the willingness for change. For some reason, it just takes time. It took 24 years just to get harm reduction as the verbiage, added. So, just to give you the viewer. Yes, I was not kidding. It took 24 years just to get 2 words inserted, and we heard them, and everybody was kind of in shock in Vienna because that's how slow, unfortunate change happens. But yes, we will continue to knock on those doors, and the rescheduling only gives us more passage through, as the also the ONDCP told us to pardon me, our Office of National Drug Control Policy told us to reach out to the North American drug people, which they have their own treaty between and discussions between Canada, United States, and Mexico, now adding the Netherlands to their group because of the islands in the Gulf of Mexico. Councilmember Crowitz, and then on to our next topic.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with one last little quick detail that I thought was quite interesting. We have, working in the Department of Veterans Affairs, a lot of people in the United States working on cannabis research. There's a whole lot of little independent cannabis research programs that are happening, especially now with hemp products and CBD and stuff like that in the VA system. So we have experts in the United States in our Department of Veterans Affairs that routinely talk to and work with experts and others in the Canadian Department of Veterans Affairs, which interestingly is also V.A.C. Yeah, so that's kind of cool. But anyway, the one thing that they don't have though is this high level communication. And it's just really funny that we as grassroots activists would be able to play any kind of role in helping countries communicate better and be able to work more as a team for an effort for us, as the consumer, as the citizen. But that seems to be where we're at. And I brought that up to one of the people that we were talking to from the ONDCP. You had it right, the right letters, the Office of National Drug Control Policy, and they just kind of laughed. They really agreed with me. The way the VA, the Veterans Affairs Department, is so huge and has so many components that I likened it many years ago to talking to an octopus. And you can talk to all the hands, but then you have to talk to the head as well. And if we don't get the heads talking together, then we really don't have that level of communication that we're looking for. So we're actually talking about a big meeting in Montreal, Canada. This is the first time I think we've ever mentioned it during any roundtable. So if you've never heard about it before, that's why. But as we get closer and it becomes more real, you'll hear more about it. But that should be a lot of fun. And it's just part of our effort to bring together these huge forces of good that can actually help us, if that's all it takes.
Yep, outreach by connection, and that's what we're using. We're using our Rolodexes to pull apart the the whole thing. All right, next up is actually Councilmember Crowitz. You've got the next question. And I know that David's going to follow up, or I know he wants to ask a question on this one too, Shane. So, Councilmember Crowitz.
Can't hear me if I'm muted. Yeah, I thought this was a great question. Why? Well, let me preface it by saying that people have been looking at rescheduling and descheduling as sort of alternatives to each other, as if they're both endpoints. And it just struck me one day that they're not endpoints at all. So go back to this question: why are rescheduling/descheduling only starting points towards broader cannabis policy reform?
Is this a question for me?
Yes, Shane, and then David.
For anybody. But yeah, feel free if you want to answer.
I feel like I've kind of answered. It's a starting point because there's so much work to do in my mind, but of course that presumes that you share my view of the end game, which I happen to know you kind of do, but maybe others don't. And I mean, to me, just at a high level, until we do get criminal penalties, at least at the federal level, completely gone and like burn down all the restrictions on research. So just as a start, the work's not complete. And so that's why I personally see it as a starting point.
David.
Well, my question for Shane, but if anyone else happens to have insight on this as well, would love to hear that. Is descheduling legalization?
No. So that's a great question. And it's not legalization federally because cannabis would still be subject to a number of federal laws, including the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which is enforceable through criminal enforcement at the federal level. And the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act essentially criminalizes the marketing in interstate commerce of anything as a drug, which means advertising it to affect the human body, which is what we all do. And we're all using it for. The fact of the matter is the federal government gave up a long time ago on actually enforcing that. But then the bigger reason that descheduling is not legalization is because there are state laws. You know, I mentioned federalism and the genius of our system before, but it comes with certain sort of inconveniences sometimes, including that the federal government could completely take its hands off the wheel with respect to cannabis totally and just erase it all from the U.S. code altogether. And that would still leave all these state level prohibitions in place. And those state level prohibitions, and this is the last thing I'll say about it, those state level prohibitions are the things that are and have been keeping people in prison for cannabis related offenses. The vast majority of them are there because of state laws, not federal law. And because descheduling won't do jack squat about those state laws, it won't legalize or decriminalize. The last thing I'll say about this, because a lot of people retort, they come back and they're like, hey, but a lot of state laws for scheduling purposes, hinge on federal law. So if you were to deschedule, the idea is that there would be this need then for the states under their laws to deschedule as well. While that is often generally true, as a general matter, this is another one of those things where cannabis gets a little bit of special treatment where the state laws actually speak to cannabis itself. So they will single it out for different treatment. And it is not clear at all that those state laws would automatically change. And for what it's worth, I've actually talked to the folks in Texas about their law because I know them because I'm from Texas. And I talked to the people who run the agency, DSHS, the Department of State Health Services. And they didn't even know that that provision existed in their Controlled Substances Act, and they had no idea how to implement it if there were a change. So, look, there might be some impact at the state level, but it's not easy and it's not automatic.
If I could ask two directly related questions. Is descheduling plus necessary exemptions from the FDCA federal legalization, meaning states are doing what they want? They might prohibit it under their laws, but at least federally it's legal. And secondly, is descheduling without any changes to the FDCA equivalent to decriminalization under federal law, if not state laws?
So I think the answer to both is, and look, here's a problem. I've looked at these issues under federal law about as much as anybody, I think. And even I will admit to you that I don't think anybody has a complete list or understanding of everywhere that cannabis, marijuana related terminology are used in the federal code and code of federal regulations, which are vast and varied. But at a high level, yes, if you got it out of the CSA and you got it out from under the FDCA, so you had an exemption like we have for alcohol or nicotine, which exempts those substances from the CSA, and then they have special treatment under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, then you would basically decriminalize at the federal level. I say basically because, look, when you do that, it's going to take a long time for Customs and Border Patrol to update their regs. It's going to take a long time for all those agencies to figure out and get the memo. So I wouldn't just automatically like advise people just to, have a sort of laissez-faire approach to it, because it'll take some time for it to trickle down. But in theory, that should basically be enough to remove the sword from the stone, so to speak, for federal purposes.
Decriminalization or legalization?
Yeah, depending on how you define those terms, but in layman's terms or common sense, yes, I think it would basically accomplish it.
Yeah, people have to remember that, we were dealing with 87 years of prohibition and laws that have been cast over those many decades. And it's going to take a while to unravel a lot of the layers of this onion. Even once something happens, there's statutes and changes that are going to have to ring from the federal on down. So, initially we're going to see what's going to happen with Schedule 3, but we know that this is just the starting point. As much as, yes, we all would like to see decriminalization or descheduling outright, you could say that since 2018, I've been selling legally over the counter to adults as Schedule 5 without any issue. I've been selling to medical patients since 1999. And of course, everybody was fine with that. So there is, an unfortunately existing protocol out there that shows reasonable outcomes. Unfortunately, it's the states that allow the reasonable outcomes, not the feds. And it's going to take time, or the populace needs to understand it's going to take time for the feds. We've been trying for 70 plus years to just get it rescheduled, and we're finally here. We saw, we watched for decades as I watched John Getman go through his failure, which of course led to outright the discussion of the treaty. And that's why Michael and I and others have been working at the UN on the treaty, because of that reality is that the before, or for you, the populace watching, those that had tried rescheduling or before petitioned and went through long, arduous court cases for, in the end, the DEA to basically capitulate and say, "No, nah, we're doing our own thing." And so for finally the government to say, "Yeah, we're doing this," is huge. Just so people are aware, activists have been trying for decades, going the most proper legal routes possible, never to arrive here. And so we're at this very unique point in history. We do not know what's going to happen in the short term. We have an idea over the horizon a bit, but again, time and patience we implore for you, because it's not like Schedule 3 is going to happen and everything is just going to immediately change. That is not going to happen. It's going to be a lot of cases, legal cases, challenges, behind the scenes discussions that, if you're watching, you could participate and get off your asses and participate in your democratic process. We could use you, because a lot of change is coming just because of Schedule 3, which opens now the discussion. First, we just want to reschedule. Now that's out of the way. Now we have a new frontier of discussions and discussion points to proceed on, and that we have to also huddle about. But nor here nor there. We'll move on to our next question, which is to Council Member Pearson Crosby.
Yeah, so just probably a good question for Mike. Why can't the executive branch, can the executive branch declassify cannabis or schedule it?
Yeah, I mean, Shane talked about already, about the International Drug Control Treaty, but this is something worth at least mentioning and talking about, because you get so many people that are like, why aren't they just descheduling? Why are we working on this at all? It becomes kind of a thing, it's kind of difficult as a large organization like the Drug Policy Alliance, for example, to navigate waters like that, where they haven't been able to really work with us and roll up their sleeves and really work with us on rescheduling, because that would make the people that are expecting them to work on descheduling irritated to think that they're not actually working on descheduling, as if they're competing alternatives, which they aren't. So anyway, yeah, the the bottom line is that if you want to do anything more than reschedule, you're going to need a new law. You're going to need a new federal law. The Attorney General, probably has a little bit of leeway if there were some really extraordinary reason that he could come up with for the health and safety of the people of the United States that was met only by taking cannabis out of schedules. But that would be extraordinary. It would be quite extraordinary. Um, and I'm not sure even with our Rolodex of talking points that we have something to give them to try, to be quite honest with you. But the bottom line is that we passed a law in 1971. Many say that it's called our Controlled Substances Act. Many say that that was actually a law written to implement our treaty obligations that we signed into a decade earlier in 1961 in the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs. And just signing that treaty meant nothing. To ask the kids at Woodstock, they didn't know we signed a treaty. It was passing the new federal law that gave the treaty teeth. And ironically, it was the treaty that gave the new federal law its constitutional backing. Because that was the one thing I used to get asked at these info tables that I couldn't answer as a young activist. Why did they need a constitutional amendment to outlaw alcohol, but they didn't need a constitutional amendment to outlaw marijuana? And that's because they did this circular thing where the Constitution has very, very strong deference to treaties once they're ratified. They're considered the supreme law of the land, roughly, equivalent to our federal law. So having that treaty sitting there, they already had, sort of this twisted circular constitutional argument to apply to to this new Controlled Substances Act. So in a way, that treaty was not only, embedded into this new law, but it was part of its fundamental constitutional authority. And it says very clearly in the law, the Controlled Substances Act, that the Attorney General is to assess changes in treaty status or addition of a new substance to treaty, and make those changes that he deems necessary, she deems necessary to accommodate that within our federal scheduling. So that's what they do, and they do it all the time. When they have new substances that come out almost every year, these new analogs of fentanyl or whatever, they're very quickly added into our Controlled Substances Act through this mechanism. And we actually expected cannabis to be downgraded very quickly after we changed the treaty back in 2020. Surprised it's taken this long, but certainly the treaty change helped the process. You certainly can't say anything, that it wouldn't have helped the process. But anyway, that's where we are now. We're at a point where we need a change in our U.S. federal law to go any further than Schedule 5, as Shane pointed out. And and this is important, David helped me learn this, but the federal government, our legislative branch, the Congress, is not constrained by these treaties. They can write a law that says, whatever, F you to the treaties. We as Veterans Action Council are working very hard to try to get ahead of that and think through some of that from a State Department perspective, and maybe work on the language of a new bill if all it takes is language, maybe, and not a change in the intent or the purpose or the extent of the reform. If maybe just the language keeps us out of trouble in Vienna, wouldn't that be nice if we thought about that in advance? It's kind of our working process. But anyway, that's where we are right now. Is hopefully we'll get a new bill out of Congress that takes us further and does more to remove cannabis from control. And hopefully they use the correct language to sort of keep us out of trouble in Vienna.
And I'm looking at you, banking. All right, David Borden.
So my question first, to make sure I have things right, and then comments. Shane, I've seen and I think heard on at least one webinar a legal argument that you and another attorney have put forward for defending an executive move to deschedule in light of the CSA's treaty clause. And correct me if I have anything wrong, and I'm going to say this first rather than just letting you, because it'll set up what my questions will be. If I understood it correctly, you've argued that the language of that clause does not say you have to match necessarily have to match the requirements of the UN schedule. That the word used is place it in the appropriate US schedule, and you argue in relation to that it could be one could take the point of view that due to the constitutional limitations of our federalist structure and how law enforcement resources are allocated, the federal government can't shut down state legalization, and therefore it's appropriate to work with legalization, and that requires descheduling. And then one can agree with that or disagree with that, but courts defer to agencies for matters of interpretation. Did I get anything wrong, or is there anything? And there's also this constitutionality question you talked about earlier. Is there anything else key that I've missed, or anything I've misinterpreted?
I've always wanted to be a law school professor, and because the questions are so hard and it's so hard to give right answers. But I think you just pretty much nailed it. And I've got to say, I'm stunned and kind of like almost blushing that anyone other than my mom has actually read the law review articles that I've written. It does my heart good to know that these things are actually getting out there and people aren't just reading them, but like committing them to heart in the way that you have. So the one you're talking about is one I wrote with Professor Bloomberg and a practicing attorney named Alex Harriman. It was published in the Oklahoma or the Tulsa Law Review. I can't remember which one. And then the other one that's the constitutionality argument I wrote with Matt Zorn, and it has to do with private non-delegation. But you nailed the first one. So far, so good. Kudos to you.
Cool, thank you. So it seems to me that if there ever is an solely executive branch move to deschedule, absent changes to the CSA first, that this is probably the argument that we would use. I have concerns, not about the argument, but in light of, or something I've been thinking about, there's been a campaign to deschedule and have people submit comments to the DEA. Let's set aside the fact that the DEA isn't going to deschedule,
right,
what we think is the fact. What if they would, or what if a future administration would do so?
I mean, I think that would be great.
Well, politically it would be great, but it seems to me that it would be great. It would definitely be great if we've gotten rescheduling first. Suppose the DEA did that now instead of rescheduling, and then it's descheduling that goes to the courts. Well, at the time you wrote that article, it would have to be considered speculative. The idea that the courts would accept the argument and not knock down descheduling, and then we wouldn't have anything.
Yes, you are a careful reader, and that is so most people don't think through this far. But yeah, I would love the result in theory, but you're right that it would be more vulnerable on judicial review. But remember how I talked about, everybody looks at these things from their own perch and where they are. To me, getting to litigate these issues that I've written about and care about so much in federal court would be like kind of a lawyer's wet dream, I guess, like my unbelievable best case scenario of my career. I recognize that I'm probably alone in that. And you are correct that a Schedule III decision is a more stable one on judicial review.
And especially perhaps since Chevron deference is no longer the law of the land.
So Chevron deference presents a complicated analysis here that I'm happy to go through if people want me to. But the bottom line is on the treaty related issues, which is the part that's the real rub for descheduling, right? As Michael mentioned, the federal government gets great deference on its interpretations of treaties separate and apart from Chevron. So Chevron didn't change that deference. Now, on other issues, Chevron arguably would have applied, but it actually gets pretty complicated. I'll tell you, my bottom line on it is that the overturning of Chevron and Loper Bright, because of the way the court did it, likely doesn't really move the needle much on Schedule 3. But we can go into that if people want. I feel I'm going to be litigating the Schedule 3 decision if it gets done, right? Like, I'm already locked and loaded and hired and everything. So I am not worried about Chevron being overturned, and I feel confident that we can prevail on judicial review on a Schedule 3 decision. As you rightly point out, if it were descheduling or something more aggressive, it starts to become more difficult. It's sort of like, building your house on a weaker and weaker foundation, or gambling on greater and greater odds. Eventually, something will break. It's just a matter of when. And so the further you go out there, the weaker the reed you're sitting on becomes.
And does the overturning of Chevron deference have potential impact at that level, descheduling specifically, not rescheduling, or not for the same reason?
It's for the same reason. I don't think that it really does, but to unpack why would take me a little bit, and it would probably bore the absolute tears out of everyone on the call. I'm happy to talk about it if people want me to. But the bottom line is that the types of questions that Chevron addressed are pretty narrow. There are only a couple of them presented here. And because of exceptions that already existed to Chevron before it was overturned, it probably wouldn't have applied here anyway. I've been litigating against the DEA more than almost anybody in the world, except maybe Matt Zorn, for the past 10 years. And in the cases I've been in, DEA has never asked for Chevron deference on anything, including in scheduling cases. So I don't think that they would have likely done that, even if Chevron still existed. Now that it doesn't, I doubt that that's going to change, right? They're not going to ask for it now it's been overturned, but I just don't think it makes any real difference to the analysis.
My last question on this, and this again is relates to descheduling, not rescheduling. And again, it's more of a concern about if there is a choice made to do descheduling without rescheduling having been done first, which we don't think is likely to happen. In that scenario, it seems to me that the argument, which, like I said, is probably maybe the only argument to make, or the case in general, would naturally lead to discussions in federal court as to whether it's really the case that the federal government could not shut down state legalization systems. And it would worry me to see that kind of discussion taking place in the federal courts, in part because I think there are ways that they could, if the political decision were made, such as issuing forfeiture threat letters to landlords, cheap and easy to do, or for the IRS to cease agreeing to offers in compromise in 280E cases. Am I worrying about something that isn't actually likely to come up?
I started to look something up on the premise of your question and then got lost. So this is under what circumstance that this would be triggered? You're talking about what decision would the state
if
be more vulnerable?
If the DEA the administration were to deschedule, purely administratively, and then with or even without the argument that you and the other attorneys forward,
Understood.
This seems like it would lead perhaps inevitably to discussion in federal court as to whether it's really the case that the federal government could not shut down state legalization systems, the businesses in particular, if it really wanted to, which seems like a dangerous question for us to have discussed in the federal courts.
I understand. I understand the premise now. And sorry for making you repeat it. No, descheduling under any circumstance, however it might happen, I don't think would increase the likelihood of the specter of a federal government coming in and shutting down the cannabis industry. Descheduling would be a monumental victory that would be, uh, pretty epic. And if the court were to overturn it, it would be based on standards of review that apply in court. So they would find either that the decision was not well reasoned, or they would find that it was contrary to some statute or constitutional provision. I don't see any of those things being connected in any way to any sort of broad-based discussion of, hey, federal government, you could have gone in there and shut that whole thing down. And by the way, even if that discussion did take place, which of course the federal government does have the power to do that now, right? The reason that it doesn't is both because it would be politically disastrous for any administration that did it, but secondly, and at least as importantly, it doesn't have the resources. So you talked about how they could send cease and desist letters and forfeiture letters, foreclosure letters, and these sorts of things. Of course they could, but the question is, could they then enforce them? And the way that the federal government normally enforces things on that level, where there's like statewide stuff going on, and certainly in the drug policy space, is it enlists the help of the states. But the states that are supporting the cannabis industry are the ones that have legalized and that are benefiting from taxes themselves from the industry, and it's creating jobs for them. They're not going to enlist themselves to enforce the federal government's, wild-eyed idea out of nowhere after decades to suddenly come and start raiding and shutting everything down. I mean, could they? Sure, right? Somebody could get me confused for George Clooney when I go to the store tomorrow. But it's possible, but it's not going to happen. Neither thing is going to happen, or I think likely.
So you suppose so in a scenario in which descheduling, an administrative descheduling decision gets taken to court, and the argument you've crafted, which is probably the only argument to make, that involves the idea that the federal government can't shut down the state legalization. You've listed reasons why you don't think they could effectively, or highly disincentivized not to. But are you saying that point, the question would not be raised in response, whether that's true, and that a discussion of that in the courts would there's just no path for that to lead to some adverse event?
I don't see it. Of course, anything could come up, I guess, right? But maybe you could spell out what you have in mind. I'm not seeing it. Here's the reason. Just let me tell you why before, just to sort of cut to the chase on it. The reason I don't think that's going to come up is because the federal government certainly has the power to shut down the industry now, like in Schedule 1. And it has had it for a very, very long time, right? Like, no question. Descheduling removes some of those levers from its toolbox. And so I guess the import of your question is, a court might say, no, it has to have those levers, right? Or I don't know. I'm having trouble seeing how it would increase it, because it actually takes away some of that power.
Well, the scenario I'm imagining, and maybe it just wouldn't happen because of how the processes work. The scenario I'm imagining is Project Sam's lawyers saying, well, actually, the federal government could shut it down, and therefore the argument that they can't, therefore descheduling is appropriate with respect to the treaties is not valid. And then a judge agrees with that as part of a ruling reversing descheduling, and then there's been a federal ruling, a federal finding that the federal government could do this. What does that does such a ruling then lead to events that we don't want?
I understand. So, yeah, I mean, look, I don't see the connection in that particular argument, but certainly bad precedent is always a risk when you litigate. What I would tell you is if you look at every major social movement in the United States, like let's just pick, the civil rights movement, right? Thurgood Marshall is maybe the best lawyer, one of the best lawyers in United States history. I mean, he's up there on the Mount Rushmore, Oliver Wendell Holmes, John Marshall, Thurgood Marshall, right? He's just an absolute stud. He certainly blows me out of the water. I cannot even pretend to be in the same like ballpark as somebody like that, right? He lost the vast majority of cases he litigated in the civil rights era, even the big ones. Brown v. Board was lost before it was won. You can look up that history, or you may be familiar with it. My point there is that just as they have all lost, it is also true that every major social movement and reform movement in the United States history has involved legal losses. It has also involved legal victories as an essential part of its progress. The cannabis movement will not be any different. You will not be able to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish without taking certain risks in court. Bad precedent can be bad, right? But the way that I think you have to look at this is you have to draw on those lessons from history and look at this like we're trying to chop down a tree with deep roots. Even Paul Bunyan, with his biggest, sharpest axe, doesn't do that in one stroke. It takes multiple strokes at the root of that tree to chop it down. That's what this is going to take too. And it's going to take an effort both in Congress, the executive branch, and in the courts to do it. I think you need to hire the best lawyers possible. I think you're doing the right thing by anticipating the sharpest possible arguments you can imagine from the opposition. And trust me when I tell you, or don't trust me, and we can talk about it more. You can kick the tires on what I'm saying here. But we are definitely diving deep in those directions and are prepared for war. And, I may not be as good as Thurgood Marshall, but I will take the Pepsi challenge with Sam's lawyers, who turns out right now is Bill Barr, any day of the week. And there's nothing I'm looking forward to more than squaring off in court with those guys on this issue, because we are right, and I am confident that we will prevail.
And there's less opposition to cannabis legalization than there was to civil rights, fortunately.
Yeah. And look, they won, so they run Brown v. Board. And this is, I think, the thing, right? Like, if you think of Brown v. Board as like the rescheduling, like this breakthrough, this watershed, I mean, it didn't accomplish civil rights. It wasn't until we got the Civil Rights Act in 1964. And to those of you who have been paying attention, you might have realized that the problems and the ills that the Civil Rights Act and that Brown v. Board were trying to get at are still with us today. These are problems we're going to have to work on our whole lives and in our children's lives, right? To solve these kinds of drug policy problems that are so deep down rooted in our, I don't know, like our Puritan past or whatever. But this is not something we're going to solve with Schedule 3. It's something that is going to require hard work for a very long time.
Yeah, we're just starting to do the heavy lifting. And this is, finally, we've been working on the side. Now we actually can do the heavy lifting.
Totally.
All right. Well, I have our next question is, what are the potential economic benefits of completely descheduling cannabis compared to rescheduling it to Schedule 3? Now, we came from this to the idea is if we are, and you all have all made us aware, we're going to go a schedule before they go descheduling. That's just the logical and the route that it's taking. However, we did just kind of, we were just kind of dream building a bit and the idea of the concept. So again, this is kind of toward one of those, what is possible, what isn't. Shane?
I mean, the benefits of descheduling would be the economic benefits would be massive. I mean, it would decriminalize at the federal level most of this stuff. It would open up interstate commerce, at least, like, vastly. And it would remove the specter of stigma and federal enforcement from the lives of everybody trying to profit off of this, which would remove market barriers, barriers to entry, in a major way. And I think, another thing that it would do is very soon, maybe not immediately, but very soon, the economics of prohibition at the state level would start to look stupid. It's sort of like with gay marriage. Whatever your views of homosexuality and gay marriage, just as a matter of just dollars and cents, after a while, you can really hate, Adam and Steve getting married, and it may be against your Baptist principles. And look, my dad's a United Methodist minister. My family's church has struggled with that. So I'm really not trying to cast judgment. I'm just dollars and cents. As the Democratic role starts to come out, and people are making more and more money off of something, it becomes harder and harder for states as a matter of policy to continue to prohibit it. And that will be true with cannabis as well. And so, a full descheduling would be like, I have trouble thinking. I'm not an economist, so I can't put numbers on it, but it would be like exponentially bigger than Schedule 3. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, with the ripples, it hit across, from the prison industrial complex on down, you know what I'm saying? And that's so deeply rooted in the economics now of, the United States, because it's our only access to, slave labor or non-US paid government labor, which of course, as we see, or the fear is, as we see the further decriminalization of cannabis, the fear is we're going to see other criminalization in other areas of society to find effective workers, because the low-hanging fruit of the cannabis arrestee has formed a fundamental base of the full workforce that supplies you your Old Navy, Fruit of the Loom, Hanes, etc. So I'm not speaking out of crazy. You can look this up on the internet about what corporations manufacture in jails, and it is quite significant. And it has been fed quite significantly by this cannabis prohibition, because the cannabis people are docile people and they just want to do their times. They tend to be the ones who go in that direction, or at least statistically we have seen that. So it's just going to also be interesting to see the different ripples across the social justice and the criminal justice, because the prison industrial complex has its needs, and some prisons have outright contracts guaranteeing a certain amount of production, etc., and they rely on a certain amount of the prisoner base to manufacture. So,
man, you've got a clear and kind of dangerous way of thinking and talking. I dig it, but I have a feeling that you could get yourself in trouble with those rhetorical points if you take them to the wrong spots, my friend. And I mean that as a compliment.
No doubt. But these are the unanswered questions that we're not sure are going to happen due to these ripples, right? We look at the past to potentially look at the future. I hope to not, but at the same time, I see the needs. So it's a cautionary discussion as opposed to let's go in this direction. No. All right, leading to the next question. Peggy, Council Member Jones.
How might descheduling cannabis affect its accessibility for medical research compared to rescheduling it to Schedule 3?
Yeah, this gets into Kevin Sabet's pet project, that bill you were talking about that got signed into law. Oh, sorry, setting you up there, Shane.
Sorry, I was trying to type into the chat and I thought you were about to answer the question. So, descheduling would not change a whole lot about medical because it's already being used medically at the state level with some level of federal approval. It would not mean that cannabis had FDA approval for interstate marketing, so it wouldn't make it legal to market cannabis as a drug in interstate commerce. It would make it easier in the sense of reducing two big ways. It would reduce criminal penalties associated with any kind of activity related to cannabis, that those penalties are still going to be there in Schedule 3. Second, because almost all doctors who prescribe and recommend and dispense medicine do so via a DEA license, anytime a substance is controlled on the controlled substance list in any schedule, doctors who violate federal law risk their professional livelihoods by doing so. Now, the way we've worked around that is by having them recommend rather than actually touch and dispense and distribute the drug. Nonetheless, if you were to remove it completely from the schedules, those doctors would no longer need DEA licenses to interact with cannabis, which would mean that a major barrier to their professional livelihood would disappear. So you would see a lot of doctors a lot more willing to recommend cannabis to patients in treatment, I would predict. Importantly, though, and this is something people often overlook when they get this far in the analysis, doctors also face state tort for medical malpractice. I'm not aware of cases where doctors have been convicted of that or found liable for medical malpractice and tort under state law, but it's important to just know that that would still be there. But, all this to sum up and put it simply, it would make it a lot easier for a lot of indirect reasons. But there would still be the barrier to interstate commerce, and it would not be an FDA approved medicine.
Tony.
Yeah. On that note, like if they made it like the tomato plant model, where you could grow tomatoes at home, you can sell them in the market, you have a craft tomato company, and you could have a factory tomato farm with make Heinz ketchup with it, or you can extract a lycopene or some chemical out of it and make a vitamin. You could do anything with a tomato plant. They need to make the cannabis plant like that, where you can grow it at home and sell it locally. And somebody wants to make some medicine off of it, then they buy the license and they could do it. But they shouldn't criminalize growing at home to take care of yourself. So, thank you.
All right, Michael.
Yeah, I'm glad that Shane's saying he's gonna have to get off here in a bit. I appreciate that. I have the moment to just grab the mic, because that's one of the things I wanted to say real quick, was just how heartfelt we really thank you. I thank you for joining us tonight. This is it's such a simple thing when they say, oh, we're gonna try to reschedule cannabis and we're doing this or that, and you support it. Boom, that's easy, very one-dimensional. But now that we're actually getting to the door, just like with legalization and other things, it becomes so complicated as we walk through. But I had one more question, if you want to entertain it. It was a really big question for me legally. I had sort of stored in the back of my head that just popped up. We've been looking at this from our veterans perspective. The veterans policy that we got back in 2010 said all this stuff about medical marijuana. But of course, medical isn't even like a thing under Schedule 1. So the very next year in 2011, they redid the policy and they removed any reference to medical marijuana. And it was the same policy, but didn't no longer mention medical. And it's just so interesting that the feds have had this blindness to, medical versus rec or whatever, because it's all not medical to them in Schedule 1. And to my mind, if you look at the way these state laws have evolved, you had medical cannabis that was very much knocking down a door based on medical necessity arguments, based on, state rights arguments about medical this, medical that, and adult rec sort of came in under the door behind that. So first of all, is that a correct assumption? But the point that I make from that assumption is that if that's right,
yes,
once
that's
we
correct.
reschedule
Next.
to Schedule 3, all of a sudden this protection, this skirt, if you will, that adult rec has been hiding under gets removed. Is adult rec going to be in trouble under Schedule 3, before we get descheduling?
That's a really great question, and part of this requires a crystal ball that I don't have and will never pretend to have. My sense of it is that for practical reasons, the adult use part is actually harder to go after, both because of resource issues and because, curiously, and this is something people don't talk about, the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act only outlaws interstate marketing of a drug. That means treatment and cure claims. That means medical. So it's actually easier, ironically, to make something legal recreationally than it is to make it medically legal. And part of the reason for this is because we have this assumption under our law, and I won't get into all this, but I'll just tease it for you here. And I think, Michael, you know where I'm going with this. The way that it works in our system is you can say it one of two ways. One way to say the principle is that the federal government doesn't recognize your right to use things because you want to, unless it's going to make profits for the alcohol industry or the tobacco industry, basically, right? Or food. Okay. Just because you want to do it, it makes you feel good. That's not good enough. And in fact, we're going to criminalize that unless there's some medical use. Another way to say it is the only way you can use something that isn't alcohol, cigarettes, or food in this country is if it profits a pharmaceutical company. That's been the principle, right? the upshot of that is that if the way that the system has been designed is we've tried to make it so that drugs, anything that affects the human body, has to go through that pharma pipeline, right? But if you get away from that and you look at what's happened with cannabis, all of a sudden you realize that it's actually harder to get real pure medical use, right? Because it's always required FDA approval. So now what we have is a kind of compromised medical use that's intrastate only. We don't have full blown FDA interstate medical yet. And ironically, it's a lot easier just to get the federal government to turn a blind eye to adult use at the state level because they have no way of tracking it and they don't have the resources to enforce against it. Whether that would change if the federal government were one day to embrace full blown medical is a good question. My sense is probably they're not going to because they won't get state cooperation to do so. And the dollars and cents just don't add up. But I could be wrong, man. Like we're getting to stuff that's like, beyond, they didn't teach it to me in law school. And I think your guess is kind of as good as mine.
David, to follow up.
A question for Shane, since you're leaving. There's a constitutional concept. I'm sure you know more about than I do. The Dormant Commerce Clause, and there's a Foreign Dormant Commerce Clause or Dormant Foreign Commerce Clause. These heavily limit the options for states to regulate in ways that discriminate against interstate commerce affecting their states. Some observers, like Shalene Tidal, think that when this happens, it will make the existing state frameworks unsustainable, barring action by Congress to protect them. So when does this kick in? Are Shalene's concerns, do you think they're on target at that level of the effect? When should we expect the litigation to start? And can Congress, is Congress allowed to take the steps necessary to allow states to keep doing certain things that they are now?
Sure. So let's start with when should we expect? So the Dormant Commerce Clause litigation has already begun. Many cases have been brought in Maine, California, all across the country. Some have prevailed, some have lost. The Dormant Commerce Clause is a controversial doctrine. I mean, it's settled in the sense that it exists and it's been around for a long time, but there are plenty of justices on our 6-3 very conservative Supreme Court who question its bona fides as sort of something that's not written explicitly into the text, and they might be willing to cut back on it considerably, and they've said so. Nonetheless, it is the law of the land. It has been enforced in the cannabis context in Maine on certain licensing restrictions. I think that what Shalene is really concerned about, and I know her well and we're friends, we disagree vehemently about almost everything. She's very smart and a worthy adversary. So I wish she were here to defend herself. But I think that what she's primarily concerned about are some of the minority preferences that are embedded in state laws that would effectively discriminate against out-of-staters based on race, which would be pretty straight up, like clearly unconstitutional under the Dormant Commerce Clause. I mean, the fact is that a lot of state laws are unconstitutional under the Dormant Commerce Clause. A lot of state cannabis laws, they're designed to build up an industry in that state and to discriminate against out of state, right? Like that's the point. And the reason that they did that wasn't because they were trying to make money at the expense of other states. It was actually because they were trying to prove that their regimes were intrastate. But that doesn't matter. There's no, I didn't mean to do any harm exception to the Dormant Commerce Clause. So this is already starting to happen. Will it happen more if we get Schedule 3? I mean, it depends on, it depends on the appetite for litigation and if people are going to bring those cases. But the fact is they already are. I am certainly not as doomsday about it as Shalene is. And, her proposed solution, I think, is worse than the disease, but this is a conversation that we could have another day. Last thing I want to say on this is the most engaged and sort of sophisticated group of interlocutors I have ever spoken with outside of like real heavy hitter lawyers on this. Like the fact that we have covered like almost word for word every article and law review article that I've published, the dormant commerce clause, which is something that most people don't even remember from law school, even if they graduated very high in their class at Harvard. I mean, kudos to you guys. It's truly kind of astonishing. And the fact that we've gone for as long as we have, and you still have like really heavy hitting questions, like I'm not just saying this, like that's pretty freaking impressive. So, I mean, I wish everybody were as engaged, and I hope that you will remain so, and you know, continue to work on this stuff.
Well, needless to say, that's our mission. We are activists locally, regionally, and we've come together as veterans here to work together to make the change. And we cannot thank you and David enough for making this discussion extremely deep. We took it in places which we hope covered a lot, and I think we did. We did our research so that we weren't coming with just surface questions, but we also kind of slowed it along because we want to take the viewer with us. There's a lot to understand and to absorb, and we didn't want to just smack somebody straight up the head as much as lead them down the path so they can understand the nuances that we are looking at and towards, because we are at such a unique time and point in history that we've never been before, and it's exciting. It's alive, and you don't have to worry about us. We will be actively plugged and involved. This is our mission, and we're just volunteers because we care. But we also see the damage that's been done, and we're trying to do our best to help bring about that change by educating people about the levels, because as you know, we got a lot of dumb questions ever since this rescheduling argument, came along and came out, and we hope we were able to dispel a lot of the myths and misinformation so that you, the viewer, can have a better educated foot to stand on and a solid ground. So if you haven't, please go submit your comment. You have until the 22nd of July to submit a comment to the DEA. It is public and open to the public. Michael showed right before right as we started, there's about 34,000 comments currently for the DEA to go in and through. So I want to thank everybody for joining us in this rather robust discussion on the dull issue that is Schedule 3. And if you have further questions, please reach out to us. And Shane, I would love to have you and Shalene on here for a tete-a-tete. We would welcome that with open arms, because we have great respect and love and admiration for y'all and what you're attempting to do. And we are, as veterans, we are part of that social equity discussion. So, that is
Totally.
something that we, look forward to, and we hope we would potentially be able to host in the future. So
Would love to do it. I had no idea what I was getting into. If you had told me Shalene were going to be here, then I would have known. And I can assure you that if she's going to look, I want you to know, I respect her. We are friends. She is extremely intelligent and well spoken, and I would love to talk with her and you guys again whenever we have time. So happens that right now I'm working on my own 95-page comment to submit on July 22nd. So I got a 8-week-old upstairs and a wife who desperately needs my help. So
right.
lots of things I got to get to before I can fight Shalene. But one day I hope that happens.
No problem. We look forward to that. So thank you, David Borden. Thank you, Shane Pennington. Our council members, Leslie Fries, Pearson Crosby. Oh, Nate Landau showed up. Michael Crowitz, Tony Landry, Peggy Jones, And I'm Etienne Fontaine, and I thank you for joining us for V.A.C. Roundtable number 78 for our final thoughts on the eve of rescheduling. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your night and be safe out there.